Imagine being tied in a sack with a monkey, a snake, and a dog, then tossed into a river, alive. Ancient Rome didn't just punish criminals, it made a spectacle of their suffering. What you're about to see is darker than you'd ever expect from a so-called civilized empire. These are the 10 most brutal punishments in ancient Rome, and each one reveals just how far the empire would go to maintain control, order, and fear. Death from the Tarpian Rock, public disgrace. Perched high on the Capitoline Hill, the Tarpian Rock stood as a warning. For traitors, murderers, and those who betrayed the state, there was no fate more humiliating. From 25 meters above, the condemned were hurled to their deaths. No ceremony, no last words, just a drop that ended in shattered bones and shame. The name itself comes from a traitor, Tarpeia, a Vestal virgin who opened Rome's gates to the Sabines in exchange for gold. But instead of riches, she was crushed beneath their shields and thrown from the very cliff that now bore her name. To die here was to be erased from honor. There was no burial, no remembrance, only the fall and the silence that followed. But for Rome's enemies, sometimes the fall wasn't fast enough. Giant seesaws and lions, the Petaroa. In the arenas, entertainment had a new face: horror. The Petaroa was a macabre invention. Giant wooden seesaws positioned above pits of starved lions. Prisoners were tied to each end. As one side went up, the other dropped, violently. If a prisoner was unlucky enough to be launched downward, they landed straight into the jaws of beasts. It was a spectacle. The crowd roared with every toss, treating it like a game. But for the victims, it was a slow, chaotic descent into death, to be devoured not only by lions, but by laughter. But even public shows had rules. Breaking sacred vows, that led to something even worse: being buried alive, Vestal virgins. The Vestals were priestesses sworn to chastity, chosen as girls to guard the sacred fire of Vesta. They were spiritual pillars of the empire, so when one broke her vow, Rome trembled. The punishment? Burial alive. She was led in a slow, solemn procession, dressed in white, mourned like the dead, then entombed underground with a loaf of bread and a lamp, left to suffocate in darkness. A symbolic act, as Rome could not spill a Vestal's blood. The man involved, publicly executed. Why so harsh? Because Rome believed its very survival depended on the Vestal's purity. When that flame was threatened, the punishment had to match. And if you think that's cruel, imagine being trapped in a sack with wild animals. Poena Cullei, the leather sack. Rome had a special punishment for the most unthinkable crime: parricide, killing one's own parent. The guilty were sewn into a leather sack, along with 4 creatures: a dog, a monkey, a snake, and a rooster. A twisted zoo of chaos and fear. Then, the sack was tossed into a river. Inside, panic erupted. Claws, fangs, hissing, and shrieking. Drowning was often the mercy. Used since around 100 BC, this punishment survived into the Middle Ages, even appearing in 17th century Germany. But Rome's cruelty didn't stop at symbolism. Sometimes, it was purely sadistic. Death by bee stings. Mentioned by historians like Suetonius, this obscure yet horrifying method involved tying the victim in a basket near agitated hives. Sometimes, honey was smeared on their skin. Then the bees were provoked, sting after sting, over hours or even days. Death came slowly, by allergic shock, infection, or sheer pain. Used for traitors and deserters, it wasn't just a punishment. It was a message. Every sting was a lesson in loyalty. Then came the punishments reserved for soldiers, and even they feared them. Decimation, military discipline by terror. To fight for Rome was an honor, but failure brought decimation. If a unit showed cowardice or disobedience, the commander ordered decimation. 1 in every 10 soldiers was selected at random. The others were forced to beat them to death. No exceptions, no rank, just fate. It happened under Crassus, during the Third Servile War. Even Caesar threatened it during civil unrest. The message was brutal. Rome didn't just kill you for failure, it made your brothers do it. If you were lucky, you'd be chosen to kill. If not, you prayed for mercy. Fuarium, the silent execution Rome demanded absolute discipline. For desertion or falling asleep on duty, soldiers were sometimes punished by Fuarium, being beaten to death with clubs or whips by fellow legionaries. The method was cold, systematic. Survivors, if any, were permanently marked, both in body and shame. There was no glory in it, only silence and pain. But sometimes, death wasn't quick. It cooked you, slowly. Death by boiling. Used especially under Emperor Nero after the Great Fire, boiling was a favorite for counterfeiters and rebels. The condemned were lowered into giant cauldrons filled with water, oil, or even molten tar. The skin blistered. The screams echoed. Audiences watched, unfazed. It wasn't just death. It was slow, deliberate agony, made public. Yet no punishment matched the slow, suffocating terror of the cross. Crucifixion, the ultimate Roman horror. Rome didn't invent crucifixion, but it perfected it. Reserved for the lowest of the low, slaves, pirates, rebels, and early Christians. The condemned were flogged, stripped, and nailed or tied to a cross, then left to die. It could take hours or days. Death came from exhaustion, blood loss, or slow asphyxiation. The body was left hanging, a warning. It was meant to strip away not just life, but dignity. The most famous victim? Jesus of Nazareth. But he was one of thousands. And for the highborn, Rome had a more refined method: strangulation in the Mamertine prison. Beneath the Forum, the Mamertine prison was a cold, dark pit. Once a cistern, now a tomb. Here, the most dangerous enemies of Rome, kings, generals, conspirators, awaited their end. They weren't dragged to the arena. Instead, they were led into silence. There, executioners strangled them, quietly, efficiently. No crowds, no spectacle, just the end. Jugurtha of Numidia died here. So did Vercingetorix, the Gallic hero who dared defy Caesar. Rome believed in mercy, but only in the form of a clean death, hidden from view. To rule the world, Rome believed. Fear was stronger than justice, and for centuries, it worked. Each punishment, each death was a reminder. Disobedience would not be tolerated. Whether on the battlefield, in the Senate, or on the streets, Rome's wrath was absolute. But in the end, it wasn't justice that kept people in line. It was the fear of the sack, the cross, the cliff, and even now, that fear still echoes. Which of these punishments shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more chilling tales from the ancient world, make sure to subscribe. Rome may be gone, but its shadows remain.